Good morning to our first session at our second day on our international virtual event. We will talk about decentralized but collaborative post-production workflows or challenges. I have four guests today. With me in the studio is Oliver from Flowworks, and online we do have Aurélien Brelle from Woody Technology. We do have John from Squared Paper and Yannick from Teamium. Hello and good morning to everybody.
Morning.
Hello, Jutta.
Morning.
Let's jump into the questions and make it a great session. The first one is for Aurélien. Aurélien, Corona required post-production to advance. What do teams require now in that special times?
Yes, you're right, Jutta. It was required for them to change the way they are working, as for all of us, I can say. And this was mainly because people were working from home, even editors, of course, all the technical teams around, the producers were all working from home and are still for some of them. So what you need in this context is first a solution to organize the work of everyone. So you need a hosted production planning and management tool to organize the post-production work. Then you need, of course, a central media asset management system that can be accessed by everyone. You need to think about the file exchange, how you will bring the media from home to the central system or from the central system to the various locations where you are editing. And you need access to all of these tools for everyone, which is bringing the question of the support of these people working from home. How do you train them? How do you support them? And also, of course, it's bringing a lot of security questions to keep all this environment as safe as if you were still in your facility.
Yeah, some of that aspects we will talk a bit more in depth now. And Yannick, what does that mean for resource planning and scheduling requirements in a distributed production and post-production teams in contrast to the centralized operations?
Yeah, thanks, Jutta. So the staff needs to be carefully managed. When you go on premises, it's pretty easy. You show up in the morning and then we give the task. When you go on decentralized and then remote, you have really to chunk any work in multiple tasks. And how you control, how you manage the task, it's very important. And you know, in post-production, there is very often some sequential process. So you can start a task only when your colleagues has maybe complete the other. So it's very crucial to get a proper scheduling and a good task management. And of course, using the communication tool notification to ensure that you don't break the process flow.
Yeah, Oliver, let's focus on the technology for a moment aside of the teams and the human work. Where is data stored and exchanged at the PAM system, so post-production management system for decentralized workflows?
Well, it depends on the setup that you have. If you have a central instance, of course, that's where the content will usually lie. But it does make a difference in what quality the content lies there. For example, if you have an external guy or somebody sitting remote doing the editing and you just want to review the edit, you're fine with the preview. You don't need the source file. So there's no sense in transferring that just to send it back and have it work with just the proxy. If you have a multi-location setup, you need to be able to shift the files around in an automated way. And because Yannick just mentioned it, it is crucial to have your project management in place, and that needs to be shadowed by the actual content. So as Yannick just explained, it's a sequential process. So if guy A is done, the content needs to be automatically shifted to the person number two, or the guy B, and that can be done with project management, just like in resource scheduling, also project management for files. But that can, if you have the luxury, and we'll go into that a little bit later, of actually having several locations, of actually moving the files when it makes sense and to where it makes sense.
So would you recommend a hybrid approach in general?
Well, it's not strictly necessary, but of course it really offers a lot of advantages. Imagine that you have a couple of people doing the editing and they will be sitting at home, they will be sitting remotely. It will be very cumbersome if they need to continuously download and upload really big source files. So we, for example, at Flowworks, we have a process called Flow Edge, which comes from the world of IoT, and it has a very simple logic where you say, I'm going to have the big data set where it is needed to do the local processing, which in the case of an edit is where the editor is sitting. If he's sitting in the facility, great. If he's sitting at home, great as well. We just need to make sure that that file actually gets to that place and that spot. So if you have a hybrid setup of a central unit and some additional local units, which is part of also the Extreme Fabric setup, of course, the workflows will automatically manage who gets access to what source file and when.
Aurélien, let's start at the beginning of a broadcast workflow. How does ingest happen if we work in a decentralized place in a MAM location?
It depends. It depends on who needs the content first and where is the content needed first. So you can imagine to have a manual or automated ingest directly to the central media asset management system, cloud hosted or on the main location. But you can also want to ingest only to the edges as Oliver just described, because if you don't need immediately this content to be available by anyone, but just by the editors around you, it will be faster to ingest to the edge system, and then the workflows behind that will manage the transfers, as Oliver described, to serve everyone that needs this content to be accessible.
Could you quickly explain what is necessary to guarantee that a decentralized ingest is possible?
Yeah, you need a tool, an ingest tool. So you need to access the right ingest tool. This can be something that you deploy for all the people that need to perform manual ingest. You can have also automated processes put in place to upload the files to the central storage or to the cloud storage. Of course, what you would like at that time is that the metadata also is enriched to make the content easy to find, easy to search by everyone in the media asset management environment. And you need a file transport layer to move the files from where you are to where you want them to be available. So that's pretty much what you need to take care about.
Yeah, John, file transport is an important topic. What are the additional requirements to work in a decentralized operation in contrast to the centralized, and what are the main challenges?
Well, I guess if you're all working in a central facility, for example, you don't need to transfer the file anywhere outside of your facility. It may be that all your editors are working like in an edit suite with direct access to high-res files. So you're going to need to, as has been touched on by the other guys, if someone's editing something remotely, either they need to be able to access the file remotely, and unless they've got a huge internet connection, that's not going to be possible to access the high-res, so they're going to need to work with a proxy. One thing that's going to be needed to think about when making the proxy is to ensure it's done with a profile that makes it frame accurate, so that you can edit on it. And then if you're transferring files in and out of your facility, you're going to need to make sure you've got the right firewall rules in, or if it's a cloud, you would call it your security groups, and make sure that your content is scanned for any viruses and errors on the way in and out of your facility, just to, it's inherently, it could possibly, it's difficult because it can be so much, without putting the steps in, it can be a lot more insecure. So you've really got to think about your security as well as the file transport itself.
So just as a side question, because I know that a lot of customers are interested in that, if they are working centralized today and like to create a professional decentralized workflow, how much time do they need to get to that point that they are possible to work decentralized, at least at the basic?
Well, I think that depends. I think one thing you can do, and I know a couple of our customers have done, for example, at the start of the coronavirus pandemic, they really needed to really quickly get some kind of remote working in place. So as a first step, what they did is they took their licenses for their on-premise editing software and they moved them onto cloud computing processes, and then they provided a desktop, like a virtual desktop experience to the cloud instances. So it wasn't quite decentralized. The content was still centralized, but the editors were able to be remote, and that was a really quick first step because they didn't have the time to. I mean, it allowed them to quickly start their remote editing without too much effort.
Thank you. Aurélien, what does that mean for the integrations into the all-over ecosystem of a broadcaster?
Yes, you are right to ask this question because most of the customers, they have their existing technical environment in their main facility. And yes, maybe one day they will completely build the system in the cloud, but most of the case right now, they still need to access and to exchange content with the main facility. However, it can make sense to probably have a hybrid approach and also prepare for the future. That can happen step by step, as Jonas said, and maybe they can start building an environment, a central environment in the cloud. That can be in the private data center, for example, and have a connection with what is on premises and exchanges with what is on premises. This can be combined with the edge systems that Oliver has described before for all the other locations that need to access the content. And here we see that we have a central system in the cloud. You have your kind of an edge that is connecting to your existing infrastructure, plus all the other edges connecting to the other locations and to the other people working. You can visualize that you have what you need already to put workflows in place to make this decentralized work possible.
Oliver, what functionality must a production asset management system provide to make it possible to have decentralized work?
I'd say there are three things that you really should be looking for. One, you really need a very competent and flexible workflow design system. Basically, you need a workflow manager that will allow you to flexibly create automation that manages all of this transfer based upon rules or based upon decisions. You don't want people to have to click buttons or go and download something. You want them to be fed with the content when it is time for them to do the job, and on content which has already been pre-processed by the previous crew or approved, what have you. And part of that workflow is, of course, the necessary transcoding, for example. People usually underestimate what you can do with well-done previews. For example, you could even edit. John, I think it was describing it before, that you actually have your edit on the central system, but the guy sitting remote will still operate the edit. If he wants to do it, he can also use a proxy to do that. It can, of course, be quite a large file, but it needn't be the source file. The second thing, which I think is really important to create ease of operation, is deep integration with all the machinery that's being used. Let's take a piece of editing software which is very popular at the moment, Resolve. We, for example, integrate on the database level with Resolve, which makes it extremely easy to feed a Resolve system, be that local or be that remote, to really get all of the editing steps that was done on a remote resolve system back into the central system and maybe do the processing there, because that machine might be more powerful, or the source file might just be sitting in the central system. So there's lots of ways you can really optimize your workflows, and the deeper your integration is, the better you will fare. The third thing that I would mention, it ties in again with what Yannick has really described, which I think is a crucial point. You've got to have a plan. You've got to know who does what when. And to do that, you need to be able to communicate. So your PAM system needs a strong suit in collaboration. You need to be able to share content, to review it, to comment it, to approve it, to disapprove it, to add instructions, etc., etc. And that really generates a lot of information which needs to be in the PAM because it needs to be visible to all. So 3 things which I think are important. Of course, there's all the technology that does all the wonderful transcoding and the transfers, the ingests, etc., etc., but I'm taking that as given.
Yeah, Oliver was talking about the editing machines. Aurélien, how does editing tools connect and interact at a centrally hosted PAM?
I think there are three possibilities here. The first one is, of course, the built-in tools, the built-in editing tools that are already part of the hosted MAM system. That's very convenient to work remotely on low-resolution content, just to do rough editing or create sub-clipping to prepare the heavier work that will come later. So this is very convenient because you have nothing to install, nothing to transfer. You work directly connected to the hosted MAM user interface, and you use the pre-built editing tools that are there. Then when you need a proper editing suite with all the features, the effects, and everything you expect for complex editing, you can have your local editing system having connection to the central MAM system and managing transfers in the background of media to upload what you create locally and to retrieve what is centrally hosted and what you need to work with. And again, as Oliver said, that can also be proxies. You don't necessarily need to retrieve the high-res to work locally on it and to do your editing, because later on you can have a background process that will do the high-res confirmation from the proxy, and that can happen all far away from you without at any moment having the high-res file transferred to your location. And the third way is to use what John described earlier, this virtual desktop experience where you are accessing your editing tool remotely. So it's not on your premises, it's not on your computer, it's closer to the media that you need to access, and you will access this virtual editing suite remotely.
Oliver, when we talk about all that access from remotely, security, Aurélien mentioned it already at the beginning, is a big topic. What can we do that it is secure to access the content?
Oh, you can do a whole lot of things. Of course, a PAM system will always have a login, that for sure. But going beyond that, you need a decent user rights management tier, which will grant access to specific statuses, meaning a file which has not reached that status would simply not be visible to you, or alternatively, once it's reached a certain status, it will become invisible to you. You need the ability to allow certain functionality and disallow other functionality. For example, changing metadata. Not everybody should be doing that. Everybody might want to read the metadata, but shouldn't maybe be changing all the metadata. But maybe just change 2 fields out of the 20 fields that you have. So you need to be able to manage that process from a systematic point of view with a good user rights management. Of course, tracking, validation of transfers, making sure that IPs that are calling your system actually are valid, whitelisting, blacklisting, etc., outside of all of the regular security protocols that you can add and use in your system.
John, we'd like to compare another time the centralized and decentralized approach. Could you give us an overview or an impression of the business processes and their functionalities?
So I guess when you're talking about business processes, you have to be a lot more careful with a decentralized system because, as Yannick briefly pointed out, you're not just arriving at work and going and having your briefing in the morning and saying, okay, you're doing task A and she's doing task B. So you really need to make sure that it's very clear who's doing what and who has the responsibilities for doing what. And you have to, some of those things you can build in with into software using scheduling software and putting rules in. But you also need to make sure you have good management team who will inspire and help your team work remotely and ensure they're doing what they need to do and not doing things they shouldn't be doing. And as opposed to the technical side, you really need to make sure your workflows are well defined and probably, relatively importantly, make sure that the workflows are going to catch errors because you're going to have and notify people when there are errors because if it's in a facility and everybody's in the same building, it's much easier to debug things. But when it's remote and not everybody can see the files or the logs and things like that, you need to make sure, as well as automating things, you automate them sensibly and you catch any issues that may occur in your automation.
Yeah, Yannick, aside all that technical requirements and workflows need to be implemented and automation, there are humans and they need to be managed. Could you give us an impression what is mandatory to make a distributed team successful and how we can help them to organize?
Yeah, you can think in a couple layers of communication. The first one, that could be communication toward your client, and that's where we will use kind of the planning or the overall, the C-level, the top management need to understand how long it will take to accomplish all this post-production job. The second layer of communication will be directly manage all the collaborative team involved in this production and post-production. So that's, you have to define, as John just mentioned earlier, you have really to define task and comprehensive task. And when you're creating a task, it's not only just say the description that has to be clear, you have also to set some target. So a collaborator can enter some value, some result of his task. And as Oliver mentioned, and the workflow, is no need to start a task if the file source is not ready. So this is how we need to really integrate among different PAM scheduling tools. No point to start if you cannot properly work. And for these collaborators, what is also key is the reporting. Reporting in a very simple manner is not only the time they spend, but how they are and their progress, because you can, as I said, as this is most likely sequential, and any delay or advance on one of the tasks has some consequences on the final delivery. And in remote, you don't get obviously the access of all the resources that you get on premises. So communication is key. Actualize a task is very important, and that's also a new task for the collaborators.
Are there specific tools which teams can use to be successful?
I think it's a question to me.
Yeah, it's a question to you.
Yeah, of course. Using Teamium is a resource production scheduling. So then giving a high-level information to the project team and also capable to track any task. That's also an impact financially, by the way. We were talking about the technical aspect, but bottom line is also important not only to track the time, but also tracking the cost. So Teamium is a extremely good software and platform designed in the cloud, and that's, of course, that serves pretty well the purpose of remote work.
Jutta, may I just add to something, because Yannick picked up on that. It's a very important thought to keep the information that is linked to the file. So I've done a little bit of editing, I've sent it to you, you have reviewed it, you may have comments, including, please change this, please change that, and then we did a second version, and then you finally approved it. That information is absolutely crucial to your business operation. And it is vital, and people tend to not quite see this point, that information is firmly attached to the files, is very clearly visible within the file context, because it drives, for example, the status. So in what state is my particular piece? That might go, once approved, trigger the next part of the work, the next segment of the work. If there are additional tasks to be done, something needs to be corrected, that needs to be attached to the file. Especially when working remote, people often fall into the trap. We've seen that happen a couple of times now, that there's been maybe informal communication. People wrote it in an email, they had a phone conversation. That is lost. It just disappears. You might never have talked about it. Because if you did that and you and Yannick had that discussion, I won't find out unless that's in the system. And I tie it into what Yannick just said, the whole reporting thing on, how much money am I spending, how much time am I using, am I on track? Also from a budgetary point of view, that is absolutely key and crucial, and it becomes very, very much more important to keep that transparent and as visible as you can when working remotely or through multi-locations, because you don't get the chance to sit and quickly discuss over a cup of coffee in the kitchen. So, it really ties into what Yannick described. The Teamium system is very good at planning and also tracking your progress, but making sure that that information actually reaches that level, the Teamium level, is, for example, part of what we would be doing with our rooms in the collaboration, in the actual managing the process and production of the files.
Are there other things we need to keep in mind when we talk about collaboration?
Well, we've talked about security, we've talked about speed. I think we need to talk about money. It's very easy to say, oh, I'm going to move everything to the cloud. It sounds so appealing. But if you don't know exactly how your process is going to run, people end up in big pitfalls where suddenly the cost of using the cloud explodes because you have it as a huge archive, which is not really what the cloud is good at. The storage is too expensive. People take an enormous amount of time uploading and downloading huge source files. That can be very tricky. You need to really look at that, because if you're doing that, your clock is ticking whilst the editor is sitting there just waiting for the download or the upload, but you're paying the man or the lady. So there's lots of ways you can avoid those sort of costs, but you need to be quite clear on what you're trying to achieve. Maybe let people like us and Extreme Fabrique help you design your process in a much more optimal way.
Yeah, you mentioned Extreme Fabrique, our hosted services platform. We all built that together. John, your team also did contribute to that platform. Could you give us a quick idea how we transport the centralized to that hosted platform?
Sure. So there's a few things we can do. There's a few ways. Basically, if you're going to want, let's say, Extreme Fabric can be quite useful for scaling up horizontally as well. So let's say you're processing things with your equipment that you have on premise, but let's say either you've got some more people working at home or you've just running out of processing ability on premise, so you want to send off some files to be processed through Extreme Fabric or to enable them to be accessed remotely. So, you can just simply, users can upload things using their web browser or an FTP. But really, where our expertise as a group of companies working together to build Extreme Fabric is actually what we can do is we can integrate your existing systems with Extreme Fabric so that you can auto scale your processing into Extreme Fabric as and when you need it.
Yeah, Oliver, we try to build some or help to bridge some challenges with Extreme Fabric. Could you give us an overview about it?
Well, I think the basic thought is quite simple. You know, a lot of people have been saying, "Oh, I've got this production process. I'm going to move it to the cloud." The next thing that happens is they get stuck because they realize they need all sorts of additional software, a planning tool, an ingester. Obviously, they'll need a PAM or a MAM system. They need a decent workflow engine. They might even want to add on playout. So what we did as a group, you know, we pooled our competencies and our knowledge and our experience, and we combined it into a product, basically, which comprises of modules. So it depends on, you know, where your starting point maybe is, what you're trying to achieve. You'll use some of the modules, a little bit like a Chinese menu. You know, it's a big choice, but you don't have to eat everything. You just pick the starter you like and the main course you like. But if you like a specific flavor, we can also cater to that. The thought, John just described it quite rightly, you know, this is a great way to move into a solution as a service environment, and because you're not doing it on your own. And you know, if you call AWS and ask them, can you build me a solution as a service, they'll politely hang up the phone because they don't know what you're talking about. So that's where we come in. If you're just going to use it to scale up your existing, you know, beef up your existing environment, that's a fantastic way of doing it. If at the moment, because of the COVID situation, you are really needing urgently to create decentralized network operations, we can do that out of the box for you. If you want to beef up your operations by saying, I will have a central instance, but I need to create a whole range of local additional installations, and they need to be interconnected. They need to work as one, which at Flowworks we call that a decentralized network approach. That's where our Flow Edge comes in, which is basically actually a little box that you can rent or buy, and use that for the period of your production, and couple that to your either existing local machinery or couple it with the Extreme Fabric to get even more mileage out of the whole thing. So it's, you know, it's a large offering. It's a solution as a service, and it's comprised of people who know what they're talking about, who, you know, I think are leaders in their particular fields of expertise, and it really is the best of many worlds. The whole being much larger than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to summarize quickly. So if you have a challenge in organizing your teams remotely, if you have a challenge in organizing your content to make it ready for remote teams, if you do have needs in workflow optimization, in workflow organization to work collaborative, you can ask us. If you like to bring your content to a hosted platform, Extreme Fabric is a good option, and we are happy to talk with you about this. Just also right away now in the coffee bar you will find us, and we are open to chat with you about the different options. I'd like to thank you, all of you. Oliver, you just stay, you keep here for the next session. Aurélien, John and Yannick, some of you or all of you we will talk to again later in sessions. Thank you for being here in the first talk today, and see you later.